The Raid, presented by Caitlin Urban. On December 7, 1941, a day that will live in infamy occurred. Pearl Harbor. 360 Japanese planes attacked Battleship Row in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. This was a surprise attack on a Sunday, so many people were relaxing or getting ready to attend church. The aircraft carriers were out at sea practicing runs, so only the smaller ships, like the battleships, were left at the bay. There were 18 ships total in the harbor, 9 being battleships. They were the USS Arizona, Pennsylvania, Oklahoma, Nevada, Tennessee, Maryland, Utah, California, and West Virginia. About 2,402 American lives were lost. 1,282 Americans were left wounded. Many people could be heard from the underneath of the capsized ships screaming for help and pounding on the bottom of the boats. Americans wanted revenge. General Yamamoto from Japan said the Japanese had awoken a sleeping giant, and they were not wrong. President Franklin D. Roosevelt declared war on Japan following the attacks on Pearl Harbor, which launched America's part in World War II. Post-Pearl Harbor, the United States is still reeling from the attack. Early in 1942, General Douglas MacArthur is in command of the United States soldiers. These soldiers are retreating across the Philippine Islands. It is only a matter of time until they surrender. President Roosevelt believes the Americans need a victory, even if it's only a moral victory. Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle proposes a daring and unorthodox plan. He wants to land land-based B-25 bombers airplanes to be transported by aircraft to within striking distance of Japan, and then launch an attack on Tokyo and several other cities. His plan is accepted and a top-secret training program begins. His idea was so unorthodox they didn't have any aircraft carriers or battleships big enough to handle the capabilities of these planes taking off from their deck. B-25 bombers need 1,200 feet of runway to take off, and aircraft carriers only have about 450 foot of runway. So, what did the American Navy have to do? A brand new type of aircraft carrier was just created for this event. Here it is, the USS Hornet. It is 873 feet long, 106 feet wide, and 26,500 pounds. So they doubled the runway space on this boat, but it was still not long enough, so it required a highly elite set of pilots to take off from this deck. Weeks later, the planes are ready to go, and they're made much lighter so they can take off without as much runway. An overhaul of B-25 bombers were hauled in for this mission. The flight crews were made entirely up of volunteers. They flew all to San Francisco and then boarded the USS Hornet. On April 2, 1942, 16 planes, being B-25 bombers, each with a 5-man crew, leave San Francisco Bay. So you can see here on the picture that I have that they're leaving from San Francisco here, and then there's Midway Island. So remember that. We have a current line of defense right here, and we're going to be launching outside of that. So we're going to be in enemy waters. And then from San Francisco to Tokyo, it's 5,140 miles. So it's a long and very treacherous trip across the ocean to plan this sneak attack on the Japanese. After 16 days at sea, on April 18, 1942, 150 miles from launch point, a Japanese patrol boat is spotted. It is sunk immediately. The USS Hornet is 650 miles from the mainland Japan. The planes take off. Each bomber carries 4 bombs. Colonel Doolittle's plane is the first to launch with 15 bomber planes following. The weather's not good either. It is raining and there is 50 to 60 mile per hour winds on deck of the Hornet. So after about 4 hours in the air, the pilots approach their military target over Tokyo. The Japanese civilians are cheering because they think they're Japanese pilots. The Americans then start to drop their bombs, 64 total. After dropping their bombs, the Doolittle Raiders fly towards China. The Chinese are also fighting Japan at this time, so they are an American ally during this time. They had 3 options when they were up in the sky. You could land in China, they could crash land if they were running out of fuel, and then they would also face capture with that. So the plan originally was that all 16 planes were to land in the Chinese airfields. 12 planes crash land in China, 3 planes ditch into the South China Sea, and 1 plane lands in Russia. You may be wondering what happened to the 80 raiders after the attack. 73 survived, 3 are killed bailing out of a plane, and 8 are captured by the Japanese. Out of the 8, 3 are executed, 1 starves to death in a prisoner of war camp, and 4 are released at the end of the war. 69 raiders make it back to the U.S. in 1942, and each year after, they've had a reunion to commemorate. So how does this change history? It was a huge moral victory. The Japanese thought the planes were launched from Midway Island, which is behind the U.S. line of defense, but much closer than Hawaii in geographical positions. So the Japanese begin their plans for the Battle of Midway. And 2 months later, the Japanese are defeated by the USA at the Battle of Midway. The Doolittle raid catalyzed the beginning of the end for the Japanese defeat in World War II. 6 months later, the Japanese surrender. Although the bombs caused no real damage to Japan's war footing, the psychological damage is immense. The emperor had told his citizens that the Americans could never touch their homeland and that it was sacred. So they worshipped their homeland so much that it was like a religion to them. And a seed of doubt is now planted into the minds of the Japanese, so they begin to doubt their emperor's ability to protect them. The last Doolittle raider passed away on April 19, 2019. His name was Richard Cole. He was 103 years old when he passed. If you would like to read more on this topic, here are some great suggestions. First, you have 30 Seconds Over Tokyo by Ted W. Lawson. Next, you have The Doolittle Raiders by George Nolta. And finally, you can read Target Tokyo by James M. Scott. So if reading isn't your thing, there's also some great movies that remember this event. First one, you got 30 Seconds Over Tokyo. Then you have a portion of Pearl Harbor dedicated to this. And then the beginning of the 2019 film Midway starts out with a scene from the Doolittle raid. Thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed a little more knowledge on the Doolittle raid.